hope you have your Bible with you this morning because I don't have any slides, and I do have some reading. And I'll tell you where to go here in a few minutes, but make sure you've got your Bible handy. But let me start by expressing my thankfulness. I am thankful for your prayers. I am thankful for the cards and for the text messages, and I am thankful for your patience. It has been a difficult time. And by the way, Rich is under the weather this morning as well. I'm thankful for Rich because he has been overwhelmed with all that he has had to carry over the last week or so, and maybe that contributed to some of his health issues this morning, so you might pray for him as well. But it's been a difficult 12 days. It's been a dark 12 days, and when you go through periods like that, you think about negative things, right? And when you're a preacher, what you think about is what you're going to preach about. So I have a negative topic this morning, but it's not just because of my journey. It's because of something else that happened this past week. See, this past Monday, we acknowledged the anniversary of one of the darkest days in the history of our nation. We acknowledged the anniversary of a date that changed the course, not just of your life and my life and of our country, but of the world. And I don't have to go into immense detail or explanation about it. I just have to give you the date. That's how powerful that day was, and that was 9/11, right? I would venture to say that there are very few who are here this morning who that you do not remember exactly what you were doing, how your day progressed, and even your thoughts. At 8:45 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the World Trade Center towers, one of them. There were 92 people on that plane. I was in my office at the church building at Jupiter Tequesta. I remember it. I had the radio on. I remember when it happened, and something about it felt different. And so I immediately packed up and drove home. And within a minute of getting inside the house at 9:02 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the second tower. 65 people on that plane. I remember sitting there, just like you do, kind of dazed. How is this even possible? And then at 9:43 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon. 64 people were on that plane. And then you're just wondering if it's ever going to be over. You're not hungry. The things that you were going to do for the day don't matter. And then at 10:10 a.m., word came out that United Airlines Flight 93 crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Apparently stopped or prevented from hitting whatever was its intended target by the passengers overthrowing the hijackers. 44 people were on that plane. And none of those numbers include the thousands of people who were in the towers or in the Pentagon or the first responders. It was a dark day, wasn't it? And I don't know that we'll ever forget it. I hope we don't ever forget it. Because, see, the importance of that not forgetting is not that I remember that it happened. I mean, that makes it like a birthday, right? I mean, you remember your birthday every year. Your wife may forget it, guys, but you remember it, right? I know that goes the other way more. But over the course of time, I mean, it doesn't matter as much at 55 as it did at 15, does it? That birthday? Well, that's not the way this works with this kind of remembrance. It's not just to remember that it happened. It's to remember what I learned from what happened. It's to remember the mistakes that were made. It's to remember the changes that existed. So I don't go back and repeat the history that brought about that tragedy. And you know the most important lesson that we learned from that day? It was about death. That's why the day was so powerful for everybody. And I remember James talking about that in James chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, when he very powerfully says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city. Spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." All of those people got up that morning with plans. You got up that morning with plans. But I venture to believe that they changed, didn't they? And James says one of these days we'll get up with plans, but we won't end our day here. Death is inevitable. It's not pleasant. You don't like to think about it. I don't like to talk about it. But there are lessons that I learn about it that help me prepare to live. So I don't think you can truly live in this life unless you are prepared for departing this life. So I want to talk about that just for a few moments this morning. And I want to begin with this idea. I want us to recognize that you're not the exception. I'm not the exception. All men end the very same way. And you know, we all began through what happened in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 7, where God took the dust and He created man and He gave him life, but He didn't just give him an existence, He gave him what was necessary in order for that life to be sustained, in order for that life to be fulfilled. And then He breathed into man His breath, and we became a living soul, and that's what made the dust that we were formed from. That's what made us different from everything else that would be formed from the elements. That we were made in the image of God. And a portion of the sustaining of life for mankind caused God to create this garden, and in it's all this vegetation from which man can be nourished. And there are two special trees there, and one of them is called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that tree, man is told, you can't eat from that tree. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 9. The other tree, the tree of life. And see, that tree keeps man healthy. Keeps man, well, we weren't created eternal, but as long as we have access to that tree, we continue to exist. But that's not what happened, is it? Romans chapter 5 and verse 12 and Romans chapter 6 and verse 23 tell us what happened back there. And what happened back there is sin came, and when sin came, death had to come too. Because death is the consequence of sin. And so what that means is, according to Genesis 3 and verse 19, once death comes, what that means is we have to return to the dust from which we were taken. And that sounds so drastic. It sounds even kind of harsh, but the reason it's so drastic, this turn that happens on the earth at that point, is because man himself has taken a drastic turn. I mean, we have turned. Man has turned against his Creator, his sustainer. And so there's no sustainer there, at least not to continue with that work. And so death is proclaimed. Man is removed from the tree of life. He won't live forever anymore. We won't live forever anymore. And we see darkness. But if that's all you see in that account, you're missing the most important part. Because in the midst of all of that darkness, what you also see is the brightest of lights as God proclaims a plan that has been in His mind even before He created man, in that He would be sending a sacrifice to atone for man's sin, Genesis 3 and verse 15. And in order to provide a picture, a type, if you will, of that approaching sacrifice, He made the first sacrifice Himself, Genesis 3 and verse 21. And so God began this process of bringing man back. That drastic turn has to be reversed, and man has to be brought back. But the journey ends the same place. Hebrews 9:27 says, "It is appointed unto men once to die, but after this, the judgment." But we don't put that motivational poster on our walls, do we? We don't put that up on our social networking pages, do we? No, we don't do that. We live our lives without thinking about that. We don't want to worry about that. We don't want to talk about that. We don't even want to think about that until days like 9/11 occur. Because up to then, it's always somebody else's problem. Up to then, it's what somebody else has to deal with. I mean, after all, I've never died. But it's out there. It's out there. It's a door through which all of us must pass in order to make it to eternity. Now, I told you we're going to need your Bible. So let's start using the text now. Psalm 90. Turn to Psalm 90, because I want to give you two Bible characters that you're very familiar with, and I want you to see their perspective of death and how it actually changed. I'm not going to show the beginning, the before. We're just going to look at the after, but we know who they were, and one of them is found in Psalm 90. This is the man Moses. And Psalm 90, as far as I can tell, is the only psalm attributed to Moses. This is the only one that Moses wrote. And based on its context and the things that are said in this, the context and the content, what I see from it is this Moses has been such a powerful servant of God. I know it began, or at least the middle of it, was kind of reluctant. You know, I know he struggled with God telling him to go back, and he didn't think he was ready, and he didn't think he was capable, but he did go back, didn't he? He did go back to Egypt, and he did everything that he could do to lead these people for God, and he was frustrated, and he struggled so much in it, but he saw it coming, and he was looking forward to it, and then one day he rebelled. And so God proclaimed that he was going to die. And this psalm came out of that. It's a prayer, if you will. And I'm just going to very quickly break down each individual point, and we'll read from it as we go through it. First of all, Moses talks about God, and when he's talking about God, he's got to talk about the fact that God is eternal. Psalm 90, verses 1 and 2. He said, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Well, Moses wasn't God. He wasn't eternal. He had a beginning. We know the account. We know that how all of those male children born to the Hebrews were being killed by the Pharaoh. We know about all of that. And we know that Moses was saved, wasn't he? He had a beginning. But God doesn't. In fact, many years before Moses even wrote those words, God had been in that burning bush that Moses stood before, and Moses was told by God that the one that was in that bush was the I am, not the I was, not the I will be, but the I am, always existing. That ought to be enough to drive us to our knees in reverence, shouldn't it? So the very first part of the prayer from Moses, when he recognizes the inevitability of his own life, is, God, you are to be praised for being eternal. Then he says this, I'm not. That's basically what he says. The human condition is frailty. Look at verses 3 through 6. You turn man to destruction and say, return, O children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, and like a watch in the night. You carry them away like a flood. They're like asleep. In the morning, they're like grass which grows up. In the morning, it flourishes and grows up. In the evening, it's cut down and withers. So you contrast. Here's God, and he does not have a beginning, and he does not have an end. But when you look at our lives, all of us have a beginning, and all of us will have an end physically. It's like the grass even. I don't know whether you've noticed this, but I have noticed it. I've only been looking out the window, but I've noticed it. You know, it quit raining. We had rain like every day for, I don't know, a year. And then all of a sudden it quit raining, and you look in your yard, and that quickly the grass starts to change, doesn't it? To wither away, and that's life. Moses says that's life. It just doesn't last forever. And then he gets to his third point. And considering that brevity of life and the sadness that causes it, what he does is he kind of contrasts that and says, it may feel like a long time, but it's really not. Look at verses 7 through 11. We have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we are terrified. You've set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your countenance. For all our days have passed away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. The days of our lives are 70 years. And if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you, so is your wrath. You know what he's talking about? He's talking about what it's like when you get sick. He's talking about what it's like when you grow old. He's talking about what it's like when you deal with the end of life, and he says, it doesn't matter what your life has been. At some point, it's not all good, is it? At some point, it's a struggle, and that's supposed to remind us that it is the consequence of the fact that we turned away from God. It's supposed to remind us that sin promises great things, but it delivers terrible things. And the devastation we face in this world is the consequence of that. I mean, when you think about the things that you deal with in this life that are not, unpleasant's not nearly a strong enough word. When you think about the dark, devastating things of life, you're supposed to be reminded that's what sin brings. And then look at verse 12. The greatest verse in this, I believe, as he brings it all together, and he says, so, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. That's it. If I know that the days that I have are limited, if I know that the days that I will have difficulty in them, that there are going to be days that I don't want to go through, then what I need to know is recognize that every day is precious. And especially as it relates to my relationship to God, every day is valuable and precious. So appreciate them. And then he brings it to a close and says, here's the value. Look at verses 13 through 17. Return, O Lord. How long? And have compassion on your servants. Oh, satisfy us early with your mercy, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad according to the days in which you have afflicted us, and the years in which we have seen evil. Let your work appear to your servants, and your glory to their children, and let the beauty of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands for us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. How can I be appreciative? How can I be joyful? How can I be thankful for the bad things that he just talked about? Teach me to appreciate my bad days, because it helps me to get ready for what's coming after here. And what's coming after here, well, that doesn't even contrast with what's here. So I'm thankful that all of these lessons prepare me for the departure. You know what he's saying? He's saying without God, there's really no value to our lives. I'm sad. I'm sad when I see the atheist and the atheists looking around in our world, and they see all of this suffering that's here, and it is here. It's everywhere. All of the tragedy that's here, and they say that the conclusion to that is there cannot be a God if all of that is true. Well, that's not what I see. When I see all of that suffering in our world, what I say is, I cannot get through it without God. If there's not a God, how am I going to do this? If there's not a God, how will I live through tomorrow? Much less the darkest days that will even be coming. No, that tells me how bad I need God. And that's what I hear in the writings of Paul in Romans chapter 8 and verse 20 when he says, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope. I have hope. Death came because Jesus couldn't die without it being here. And I would be eternally lost without his death. I think there's a lot in Moses' words as he faced the end of his life, don't you? Now turn to Ecclesiastes 12, because there's another character who got to this place to where he recognized the inevitability of his death, and he dealt with it on a very deep level. That man is Solomon. You know, the most of the book of Ecclesiastes is a recounting of the life that Solomon has lived, that he calls a life of vanity. And if you go through it and you think vanity sounds like it's emptiness, right? How could your life be empty, Solomon? You had fame, you had wealth, you had power, you had pleasure, you had everything. And Solomon said, I had nothing. Because of all of these things that I had, the riches and the fame and the pleasure and wisdom and all of that, didn't mean anything without the giver of the gifts, without God. Sounds empty, doesn't it? And it was empty, but he didn't leave it empty. That final chapter, chapter 12, begins in brilliant fashion. I mean, right, the very first verse, chapter 12 and verse 1 of Ecclesiastes, he says, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth. That's the greatest of wisdom. Remember God when you're young. Don't wait till it's too late. Remember Him when you're young. Life isn't to be lived with, I'm just going to gather up everything I can gather up, and in the end, I'll make everything okay. It's not, I'll live every day for myself, and in the end, I'll give myself to God then. This book is repentance. This is Solomon saying, I wasted it all. I spent my whole life wasteful. I wasted wealth. I wasted pleasure. I wasted wisdom. I wasted fame. I wasted power. Had all of it. But I didn't have God. And his point is, if you have God, then those other things have purpose. If you have God, then those other things have meaning. If you have God, whatever is in your life has meaning. And he talks about mortality. Look at verse 7 of Ecclesiastes 12. He says, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to the God who gave it. What good was all of his wealth if he was going back to the dust? What good was all of his fame and all of his power, and what good was any of it? Well, it was worthless. It was vanity. It was empty. And then he gets to verse 13 and he says, so here's the conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. Who wants to live an empty life? Nobody wants that. Who in their right mind, truly knowing what God says about eternity, wants to spend it lost? Nobody wants that. And so we have to face life. And just in case that's not enough motivation, in verse 14 of Ecclesiastes 12, he starts with a connecting word, and he says, here's why. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. And that's all that matters. When I stand before God on the judgment day, it's not going to be to talk about what was in my bank account or my retirement account. It's not going to be to talk about whatever degrees hung on my wall. It's not going to talk about how many friends I had on social media or anywhere else. It's going to be to answer for who I am. And I cannot stand there and answer alone. I have to have a Savior. So I don't like the anniversary we just dealt with. I don't anticipate it like we do a lot of other things that we remember every year. But I do respect it. Because even if just for that one moment I'm reminded of mortality. There's only so much time. Only so much time, and every one of us individually will stand before our God. You will stand before God. You say, well, I don't believe God exists. You will stand before God. You say, well, I don't want God to restrict me. You will stand before God. And ultimately, you will bow before God. But if you have not bowed in life, then that vow's too late. If you're here this morning, you're not a Christian. I hope that tomorrow's a bright day, but I don't know that it will be. And you need to be prepared for whatever it brings. And so if you're not a Christian, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, you turn away from your sins in repentance, you confess His name before man, you are buried in water, you're baptized, contacting the blood of Jesus, having your sins washed away, Acts 22:16, being added to Christ, Galatians 3:26 and 27, and saved, 1 Peter 3:21. And that's what God says. And you know what? No matter what your day brings, you can be prepared if you'll do that. But if you're the prodigal, if you became a Christian and yet somewhere along the way you went back to the world and you're in the far country and you're wasting the blessings of God, your life has no true purpose, and you're not prepared for that day, but you can come home.